And this kind of sums it up even more. I think the Indiana Fever don't want to piss off Caitlin, but they misled her. Like, I don't think Caitlin Clark plays more than 4 years in Indiana. I don't think she's going to request a trade next year. I think she's going to be happy playing with Leah Boston. I think she's going to play one more year with Steph White. And it's going to be another year of, does Steph White want Caitlin Clark? What's this style of play? Why are the Fever playing so boring? I genuinely don't think we see Caitlin Clark play more than 4 years in Indiana. I think she's going to ask out after 4 years. Because I think this organization will go with Stephanie White over Indiana. I think they will, or over Caitlin Clark. I think they'll make that choice. I don't think she's going to cause it in public. I don't think she's going to tank the locker room. I think she's going to be the perfect teammate. But I think I don't think she lasts 4 years in this organization. But anyway, I'll see you guys.
Why would the Indiana Fever decide to shut down Caitlin Clark, the biggest draw in all of women's basketball, when the season was still alive? Think about it. Clark isn't just any rookie. She's the one who filled arenas from day one, who pushed television ratings into record territory, who turned the Indiana Fever into must-see television. So why end her season early, when fans were still buying tickets, when the playoffs were still within reach, and when the WNBA was finally riding a wave of momentum? On the surface, it makes no sense at all, unless there's a bigger story lurking under.
So Lance, today we're going to be talking about something in the WNBA that we actually have to talk about now after this article got released. So basically there is an article that heavily implies that the Indiana Fever knew that Caitlin Clark they weren't going to let Caitlin Clark come back weeks ago. And because they just strung her along, they misled her and said, you know what, we're going to let you train. We're going to let you try to ramp up, even though we're going to rule you out anyway. No matter how close you get, we're going to rule you out anyway. And they were like apparently trying to encourage Caitlin to try to come back while also not letting her play. We have to actually talk about this because
Caitlin Clark's 2025 season looked like it was destined for history books, but it started to unravel piece by piece. It began with a quadriceps strain in late May, just as she was hitting her stride as a professional. Fans expected a quick recovery, but the timing was brutal. The Fever needed her, and she was already becoming the centerpiece of the league's media machine. She returned in June, but the comeback didn't last. By late June, she was sidelined again, this time with a groin issue that seemed minor at first. Athletes deal with tweaks all the time, right? But Clark's situation got worse instead of better. Then came mid-July, when another groin injury struck, this time on the opposite side. Suddenly, it wasn't just about a single mishap. Her body was breaking down on both ends. Add in a bone bruise in her ankle not long after, and the writing was on the wall. Caitlin Clark's season had become a medical spiral. Still, shutting her down for the entire year seemed drastic. Athletes have pushed through worse. Fans began to wonder, why wasn't the Fever doing everything possible to bring her back before the playoffs? But that wasn't the whole story. When Fever coach Stephanie White spoke to the press, she didn't hide behind excuses. She said the quiet part out loud. There simply wasn't enough time left.
If the Indiana Fever, it seems like they knew they weren't going to let Caitlin Clark come back. So with knowing you're not going to let Caitlin Clark come back, you realistically know you're probably not going to do anything in the playoffs. So the smart thing would be to tank and get a good draft pick. But I don't believe this front office is incompetent. An incompetent front office gets to the playoffs, guaranteed loses in the guaranteed first round loss, gets to the playoffs, rather than tanking. That's what an incompetent front office does. That's what the Chicago Bulls do. But like the Miami Heat, when people are saying the Miami Heat refuse to tank, the Miami Heat sometimes make the playoffs and people think they should tank it and they fuck about and make the finals. So there are some teams that get in as a low seed instead of tanking, but you always give them like a puncher's chance, like a Milwaukee, or like, I'm trying to think, years ago, Boston, when Boston got in on the play-in after making the conference finals the year before. Miami, when they made the finals off the play-in. There's a load of these teams that are like on the bubble that you're like, in the NBA, they have a chance. When the Warriors made it through in the play-in one year, the year the Lakers made it through in the play-in and got to the conference finals. It happens.
Safely bring Clark back. Recovery windows don't bend for superstar calendars, and with just a sliver of the season remaining, the risk of re-injury was too high. On paper, it made sense. You can't gamble with a player who represents not just your team's future, but possibly the future of the league itself. And yet, the decision raised eyebrows everywhere. Why be so quick to close the book? Why not at least leave the door open for a late playoff return? The official line was about timing. But whispers started to spread that there was more going on than just the calendar. And what happened next would shock everyone. Not everyone disagreed with the Fever's decision. In fact, some of the biggest names in basketball stepped in to back it up. Lisa Leslie, one of the WNBA's all-time greats, publicly urged the Fever to shut Clark down early, warning that groin injuries can be tricky, deceptive, and career-changing if not handled properly. She framed it not as punishment, but as protection. Former NBA veteran Etan Thomas echoed those same sentiments, calling the move a relief. To him, the danger wasn't losing a few games now, it was risking Clark's ability to dominate for the next decade. Why risk a generational career just to squeeze?
It happens with teams. So those teams are not necessarily encouraged to tank. But when a team has their own pick and you have the opportunity of a guaranteed playoff loss or tanking, and you choose the guaranteed playoff loss, which they did, you might be saying, oh, but the players can't tank. No. The front office could have made sure this team didn't make the playoffs by taking Serena Sundell instead of Odyssey Sims, from taking Bree Hall instead of Aerial Powers when it happened, for not whatever argument thought Caitlin was going to be back. But realistically, if they're going to shut down Caitlin, they didn't need to take Odyssey Sims, they didn't need to bring in Shea Pay, they didn't need to bring in these players. They could have kept Kyra Lambert, who wasn't good enough. They could have brought in Serena Sundell, they could have brought in Bree Hall as a rotation player and just lost a bunch of those games.
Out a few more weeks in a single season. These arguments resonated with old school players and health experts. But to fans, the logic didn't erase the disappointment. They weren't just watching a player get benched, they were watching the WNBA's brightest star, the one who finally brought mainstream buzz to the league, being pulled off the stage at the height of her hype. And if that wasn't enough, there was another layer nobody could ignore. The Caitlin Clark effect is real. Just ask anyone who's tried to buy a Fever ticket this year. From the second she was drafted, demand for seats skyrocketed. Jerseys sold out in hours. Networks scrambled to move her games to prime slots. Merchandise revenues spiked. She wasn't just a rookie, she was a walking, breathing economic boom. The Fever, a franchise that had struggled for years, suddenly became one of the hottest tickets in sports. Entire arenas sold out, not because of their record, but because Caitlin Clark was in the building. And let's be honest, when you're talking about business impact, Clark might be worth more to the WNBA than any other single player in its history. So how does it make sense, financially or strategically, to shut her down early? Every game she missed meant lost revenue, lower viewership, and less buzz. This wasn't just an injury story, it was a business crisis. And yet, despite losing their star, the Fever weren't completely sinking. In fact, what happened on the court without her shocked everyone. When Clark went down, many assumed the Fever would collapse. After all, she was their identity, their engine, their ticket to relevance. But something surprising happened instead. The team didn't crumble, they adjusted. Veterans stepped up, role players found new confidence, and the Fever managed to hold on to playoff contention even without their star guard. It was almost poetic. The team everyone called Clark and Friends was suddenly proving it could fight on its own. But that raised an uncomfortable question. If the Fever could still win without her, then why was there such urgency to pull her for the rest of the year? The optics were strange. Normally, a team would fight tooth and nail to get their superstar back for a postseason push. But the Fever seemed almost at peace with letting her sit, and that's where the speculation really kicked in. The official story was health, but unofficially, the theories went much deeper. Some insiders suggested the move was about brand protection, preserving Caitlin Clark, not just as an athlete, but as a cultural product. If she re-injured herself and risked long-term damage, it could jeopardize endorsement deals, sponsorships, and the once-in-a-generation momentum she carried. Others speculated that pressure from outside voices, agents, corporate partners, even WNBA executives played a role. After all, Clark isn't just the face of the Fever, she's the face of the league. Losing her for a year or two due to a reckless comeback would be catastrophic. There's also the long game. Clark's career is expected to span more than a decade. In that context, sacrificing a few months now could pay dividends later. As frustrating as it was for fans, the decision might have been less about 2025 and more about 2030. Still, the move leaves one lingering truth. Shutting her down may not make sense in the short term, unless the Fever were thinking about something far bigger. Here's the twist. Without Clark, the Fever didn't fold. Veterans stepped up. Bench players got their moment. The team clung to playoff contention, surprising even their critics. In some ways, it was poetic, the Fever proving they could fight without their superstar, but that made the shutdown even more puzzling. If the team was still in the race, why not gamble on Clark returning for the final push? Instead, they seemed strangely comfortable moving forward without her. To many, it looked less like a setback and more like a quiet test. Could the Fever build an identity beyond Clark, even if just for a moment? Perhaps the most curious piece of this puzzle is Clark herself. Unlike her college days, when she was known for fiery competitiveness, Clark has remained quiet about the shutdown. No angry statements, no public frustration, just silence. And in that silence, fans began speculating. Was she privately supportive of the decision, knowing her body needed rest? Or was she biting her tongue, forced to accept a call made over her head? Either way, her lack of protest only deepened the mystery. The official explanation will always be about health, but unofficial